we start the movie, I'd like to welcome Alex Rivera to the stage, who will share a few words about The Infiltrators.
Thank you all so much, and I want to thank Ezra. This film had its Canadian premiere at Hot Docs much earlier this year, and really since then we've been emailing back and forth, and it looks easy, it's a guy standing up in a movie, but it's been a lot of work and a lot of back and forth, and I'm really grateful for the invitation and all the work it took to make this happen, so thank you. And I just want to say thank you all for coming out, and this film was made in collaboration with my partner in life, Cristina Ibarra. She's another filmmaker. She wishes she could be here tonight. But we both come from immigrant families. We both have undocumented folks in our family. She's from a Mexican-American family, and my family is Peruvian-American. Separately, when we both started to make films, we really kind of made a commitment to set our stories inside that world of transnational families, cross-border existence, looking at those, trying to unearth those stories and memorialize them in film, and also watching films. And there's obviously a history of films about immigration, but it feels like right now, something new is happening with this topic. It's become this kind of global lightning rod, this kind of third rail of politics all across, really around the globe in so many different places. And it feels like maybe we need a new cinema to address this new reality or new types of representations. And so this film, The Infiltrators that we'll watch, it's an experiment. It was something we had never done before, kind of mixing documentary and scripted techniques out of necessity to try to depict this system that I think because it's an immoral system in a lot of ways, is hiding in the shadows, and we need new ways to visualize this reality that is surrounding us. So in any case, it's a labor of love. The film took 7 years. It's meant to be fun at times, to be funny at times, but also hopefully to compel some new reflection and discussion. So I'm really looking forward to being here after the film and hearing your thoughts, criticisms, questions, etc., and getting to kick it afterwards. So thank you. Que viva Cinema Politica.
Thank you. And last but not least, Brenda López Zepeda is going to come say a few words about her short film, ABEO.
Hello everyone, my name is Brenda López, and I am really happy to be here and be paired with a project such as The Infiltrators. ABEO is about two immigrants crossing the desert, and I made it out of a reaction of the 2016 US election, being an immigrant myself, thinking about how I get to be very lucky and not being in the same situation of the characters that I portray. It is a work of fiction, but it is unfortunately based on horrifying realities that are growing numbers, unfortunately. But I did this project as a graduation film for my undergrad here at Concordia. And the first time I presented it was in this room, so it feels very much full circle. So thank you very much. Enjoy the screening.
Thank you. Enjoy the film. Thank you. So I'll, first of all, thank you both so much for the two films. I'm just going to start with a couple of questions for both of you, and then we can hand it over to the audience. So maybe, Bren, just to start, if you could tell us a bit about the process of making the animation.
This was my graduation project. I attended here the animation program at Concordia, and I started working on the story the summer before school started. As I said, I started working on it in 2017, so I had a full year of built up and pent up rage and frustration from how things were getting worse in response of immigration in the US. So that's it. I worked on it for a year, and I decided to do a mixed media because I felt that it told the narrative a little bit better, and separating each character having their own way of telling their story. And it was supposed to be 3 minutes, but 7 minutes. It ended up being 7 minutes because I decided to compromise a little bit on the form so I could tell the story properly with the guidance of my peers and my supervisor at Concordia.
Oh, thank you. And maybe, Alex, if you could tell us about why you chose to steer away from a more traditional documentary style and kind of weave together the more fictional aspects and then also including the real characters.
When we met the activists that were the National Immigrant Youth Alliance, we thought we were going to make a short film also. It's good to have a little lie that you tell yourself at the beginning of these epic journeys, because otherwise if you see that it's going to be 7 years, you wouldn't do it, you know what I mean? So we thought we were going to make a short film about basically about a protest in which undocumented youth were getting arrested, risking deportation, and we just wanted to do a kind of sort of a short about that. But when we filmed and started to edit, they went and did something else that was more interesting, and we'll film that now, and then try to edit, and then they went and did something else, and they weren't stopping. They were getting more bold and taking bigger risks. And so we just stopped editing and filmed with them for a few years. And when we identified the story of the infiltration of this detention center as the story we wanted to tell, we had a problem, which is we couldn't see half of the story. And so we knew from the beginning that so we didn't know from the beginning. At the beginning, we thought it would be just a simple thing. But then once we sort of identified this story, all of a sudden there was a problem. And it was one of those moments for me when a film has a problem is when you know it's either you're going to stop or you're going to make something like special because you have to solve that problem. And so that was what we did. We thought about animation. We thought about a variety of techniques to depict what we couldn't see, which was inside the detention center. And we settled on this kind of reenactment strategy to solve the problem. Yeah.
Okay. So now we can open it up to the audience. Does anyone have any questions? There are 2 mics walking around the room.
I can speak to the American version of that question, but maybe someone else can speak to what's happening in Canada.
To be honest, I did mostly just research also from the American side of immigration things. However, I do think that there's reflections of hostility towards immigration more and more. I mean, the last very obvious thing was here in Quebec, the Law 21. So that sends a clear signal of what kind of immigrants are wanted and what kind of immigrants aren't. And of course, also the silence of Trudeau. As much as I don't have much information about it, I also haven't heard him at any point condemn clearly the actions that Trump has been putting on immigrants. So that's a big deal. And for this campaign as well, he's been very vague, and most parties are being pretty vague on the fear of repercussions of speaking against the American government and what that can be for Canadians, for Canada.
It's a huge topic. On the U.S. side regarding police-ICE collaboration, I mean, you know, this film, the events in this film took place under Obama, and you know, people probably know he was the president who so far has had the most deportations. You know, he peaked at about 400,000 deportations in 1 year, and a lot of that massive number was through collaboration with local police collaborating with ICE. You're not apprehending 400,000 people anywhere. There has to be a national effort, and so it's done through local police. And what's oddly happened under Trump is in the backlash against Trump, a lot of states, big states, New York, California, many others, as well as local jurisdictions in the U.S. have passed what they call these kind of sanctuary bills. What they really are just breaking the link between local police so that if someone gets pulled over for a broken taillight, they resolve a taillight issue. They don't end up getting handed over to immigration. And so with those sanctuaries, kind of patchwork of sanctuary laws at the state level under Trump, that's slowed down the overall number of deportations. So what I've been hearing recently is the Trump number is like closer to 200,000, a substantial drop. But everything else you're hearing in the news is also true. There's more people in detention, much more vicious politics towards families and longtime residents. So anyways, it's a long story, but that issue is really core to kind of getting a grip on immigration enforcement, making sure that it is a separate process from, police that are supposed to be, in theory, kind of keeping communities safe, and so anyways. Yeah, so for Marco, he's working at his parents' restaurant in the Bronx. It's called La Morada. If you're ever down in New York City, you should eat there. It's amazing Oaxacan food, and there's a library of books about immigration on the shelves there. And he does activism, but at a kind of much sort of lower intensity now. Vidi is still doing deportation defense work where she lives in North Carolina. Mohammed is working outside of detention centers with a project called Detention Lifeline. Claudio, now, the film ended, when we premiered the film at Sundance, it had this ending that you just saw, which was meant to indicate that, for him, particularly him, he was still in limbo and going into these check-ins. And then after the film premiered, he had one of these check-ins scheduled in February of this year, and he went in. He'd been going into these check-ins for 7 years since he was released from detention, right? And the purpose of the check-in is show I haven't committed any crimes, and I'm still here, and they stamped the paper and let him out. But he went for one of these check-ins in February of this year, and they detained him again. So then we went through this very wrenching and surreal process, really, of almost reliving the events in this film now, this year, trying to get him out of detention now under Trump. And so the activists kicked into gear, the film community rallied, Ava DuVernay, John Leguizamo signed public letters in his defense. The activists got a bill introduced into the US Congress to try to get him out, and nothing could get him out of detention. ICE seemed very determined, and they deported him on April 4th of this year, after 20 years of being in the U.S. So the fight, that story is not over. We're still very much in touch with him and his family. And we're suing ICE, us the filmmakers. The ACLU is representing us in a lawsuit in federal court, alleging that basically if ICE is going to target immigrants who are the subject of journalistic works, how are we supposed to have sort of a free debate about this issue? So it's a First Amendment suit. He's suing ICE separately. It's kind of a nightmare. But when the film has a theatrical release this winter in the United States, we're hoping to kind of ramp up a campaign targeting the 2020 Democratic presidential field and trying to get them to say that this was an unjust deportation, so that if one of them wins in November of next year, that they might be able to bring him back. But that's it's been a really incredible and difficult year. But so that's what's happening. Well, thank you for your work and for your comments. I mean, in terms of Canada, other folks in the room, I'm sure, would know more. I know nothing. I'm here to listen about anything happening here. In terms of the U.S., I think you'd probably know a lot of the groups, it sounds like. I've been following in Tijuana Al Otro Lado, which seems to be like doing a lot of good work for recently deported folks and people, and the refugees at the border. But in terms of pessimism, we can't be pessimistic. And like we were speaking about earlier, these sanctuary bills. I was going to say it in regards to the situation in Montreal. Like the sanctuary bill in California, SB 54, never would have passed under Obama or Clinton. It passes in reaction to this kind of racist fascist that we have in currently as a president. The resistance, or whatever you want to call it, gets emboldened, and these policies are enacted. If they had passed sanctuary laws under Obama, he wouldn't have been able to deport 400,000 people a year. So oddly, this kind of darkness that is horrific, and people are losing their lives. I think it's totally reasonable to think there might be an aftershock or a moment of opportunity to do something better, you know? And so like the frame of abolish ICE, you know, which, I mean, to hear like, you know, people running for the presidency of the United States, you know, adopting that is kind of incredible and never would have happened without the, you know, the kind of the hate, the moment of hate that we're living with in the US. So I think there is, I have to believe there's on the horizon a little orange glow and something better it might come, you know, but if we all work the way it sounds like you are. So we use the actors as much as possible to go into detention. The idea was to use the fiction, the scripted elements mostly, to depict the place we couldn't go with our documentary cameras. So since Mohammed didn't go into detention in this action, he never got an actor. You know, when we did cast the actors, the first thing we did was put them in touch with the real people. So the actors who played Vidi and Marco had basically Skype and phone type of conversations with their kind of real people, and they got to see the videos and some of our footage, and so they got to be sort of oriented with the real person. Claudio, on the other hand, he came to set, and he lived with us for a month during the entire production. His family's in Florida, we're in Los Angeles. He came to Los Angeles to be with the production, and he consulted with the man who played him on his dialect. He worked with wardrobe. He hung barbed wire on the fence in our fake detention center. I mean, he was like an incredibly generous person with the whole production, and filled it with you know, just life and a sort of authentic, I don't know, just with heart. And he brought his knowledge into the process. So yeah, so that was the process. Yeah. No, it's a really good question. And honestly, as storytellers, I think it was challenging for us to kind of figure out how much sort of granular exposition about the system to put into the film to understand the story, and trying to find that balance between like how much to get in. But no, your question's totally valid and understandable. But in a nutshell, when somebody, I mean, okay, you can be undocumented in many different ways. Like Claudio came as a tourist and then overstayed his tourist visa. So the system knows he's there, but knows that he didn't leave, you know, and so that's one way of being undocumented, even though he was documented when he arrived. Marco came through the desert, right? So the system didn't know he was there. He wasn't inspected and so in any case, when you're brought into detention like this, they generate a case or a file for you. But what's nutty about it all, and kind of the beginnings of many sets of problems, is that there's no requirement for someone to be detained, and there's no sentence. It's an administrative matter, like someone else said. And so the government can kind of say, we're going to hold you until we resolve your case. And then that could take a couple years, it could take a couple weeks. And so that's why this facility was kind of vulnerable to infiltration, was because they believed under Obama that if they could get in there, do their thing, and then get on the news, that the Obama administration would sort of say, get them out of there. And that was what they believed. That was their analysis, and they were right. So the system operates, but when they come out with a case. And so then they have to report back to immigration court whenever the backlog gives them, it's their turn. And in Marco's case, he's actually about to go in for his hearing later this year. So it's been 7 years of kind of waiting through the court, you know. But in that interim, because the government knows he's there, he has a work permit and stuff like that. So it's very complicated, but that's the basics.
Okay, so but he's waiting for like a permanent status or like a citizenship.
He's
like,
actually claiming asylum. It's another long story, but he participated in another protest action with this group where he left the country. So he left the United States and went to Mexico and walked back across the border with a group of other recently deported people. That action was called the Dream 9. So it's like a whole other epic activist
Another documentary.
story. But long story short, the way they sort of came back through the border was by claiming asylum. So he has an asylum claim that will be heard later this year. Yeah, it's complicated. Sure. Maybe both of us can also answer this, but I mean, I think that these kinds of narratives always, I mean, if you're making a narrative like this, it's usually driving on some kind of emotional connection, and for better or worse, those emotional connections are usually between like an audience and one individual, 2, 3. It's rarely with 30. Do you know what I mean? It's just the limitations of empathy and narrative structure. So, I mean, really, the best we could do was to try to introduce a few characters, stand them up as people with their idiosyncrasies and their textures as human beings, and then have the wide shots up above where you'd see the hundreds, and that interplay between the wide shots, the group shots, and the kind of close-ups or the intimate moments. You hope that the synthesis of all of that, the sort of choral effect, takes you to the place you want to be, which is, like you're saying, of being aware of the scope of the human drama, but there's just no way to empathize with, with thousands of people at once. So we need to work through that language of close-up and wide and try to balance those things.
Maybe Brenda, if you have anything to add about that?
Well, in my case, the short is complete fiction, but again, it is based on a lot of research of real things that happen, like Minutemen and militia that do go out and hunt people, or what are the reasons behind all the immigrants crossing the border. You have one woman that has been deported and is going back. You have an LGBT teen who is running away. And as Alex is putting very wisely, that I think the thing that connects the films as well is that they are centered around the character. And I think that it's important that both kinds of mediums exist, ones that are focused more on numbers and facts, and I just think it's a very different kind of, different style of filmmaking. And in my, for this film, I decided to just focus on the characters and building empathy as well.
I love that animation in the sand. That was fantastic. Yeah, thank you. And in terms of finding the story, I think I described a little earlier how we met the group and kind of stumbled in a way into this story. But I mean, to me, a core question that was interesting from the beginning and remains interesting is basically with this question of immigration and this kind of crisis. I really believe that in these various types of oppressions or injustices, it's usually when the people who are suffering the injustice take leadership that power gets built and things change. And so like in terms of the civil rights movement in the US, it has to be led by African Americans. The women's rights movement needs to be led by women. It's pretty simple. And in the case of undocumented people or stateless people, there's a question, because how do stateless people build political power to change the circumstance they're living in? And when I met this group, I saw an answer. This was a group of undocumented folks building political power, and that was like fascinating, and I felt like it needed to be depicted and understood and put out there in the world as a, for history and also as a provocation, and so that was sort of what kept me interested in this topic for so long. And your second question was?
About the impact on you.
Oh, the impact on me. I mean, dude, when Claudio was deported, I felt sick. I felt sick for about a month. The watching a family go through that is really horrifying. But whatever impact I felt, I know they felt way, way, way more. So I don't try not to spend too much time like thinking about me, I guess, and try to figure out what we can do, and that's, I'm very privileged and fortunate, so just try to keep them moving. It's
not explicitly said, but in the way that I thought the story, it would be a civilian. It wouldn't be Border Patrol. It would be, there's militant groups, not militia groups in the US that take it upon themselves to go out and hunt people. And there's not a lot of media attention or documentation on this. But there's many other ways that a person could die crossing a desert. But that one in particular is pretty horrific. Yeah. I don't know if that answered the question, but. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much to both of you for coming. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we will see you all next Monday.